Thank you everyone for joining in. Let me guys just take the list of long questions that I have for this session today. One second, I've got like 15 different tough questions on creepy and contextual. I hope you guys are ready. Okay, so guys, the way we have basically, divided this session is in three broad contexts, right? First, we'll talk from a consumer standpoint. We will take a view of a consumer, how the consumers think. So I urge all the panelists to take the marketers and the technologist hat off, and let's think from a consumer perspective. And I'll share my own example first, right? So we all today know that we are not really known as our name or the way we in physical world are known as, but we really exist in the form of cookies, mobile IDs, device IDs, mobile numbers, and different IDs, the CRM ID and so on. So for one Madhukar, for example, there could be 15, 20 different IDs, mobile advertising IDs and cookie IDs and so on. And this is one screenshot that I took recently from my mailbox. What I really want to point out is this is, when I looked at my mailbox, I, on an average, receive about 35 promotional emails in a day, 35 promotional emails on my promotional mailbox and my inbox. And I also looked at the SMS channel. Now, this is just one channel. When you look at SMS channel, there are almost 20 different SMS I receive, then the call center calls, and then I'm talking about the web push notification, in-app notification, and so on and so forth. So on an average, if I just sum it up, I'm almost talking about 120 different notifications that I get on a daily basis, and I'm sure it must be more for some of you. So what really happens in this case is, I decide to ignore. So forget about conversion, I've become ignorant. And what has happened in this case is that there are some very important messages. There are some very important offers, some important notification that I should pay attention to. And what I end up doing is become ignorant. So I believe what marketers today are doing is they are becoming, well, I would not like to use the word creepy, but they're becoming more intrusive. They're trying to find out more details about you so that from this world of ignorance, you start to basically be more personalized, be more contextual. So where do we draw this line? Consumers becoming ignorant, and I'm sure this is the case with all of us. We get bombarded with emails, with notification, with SMS, and so on. So how do we get attention to the right message? And I would let's start with you, Kabir. We were just discussing it a while back. So what's your take on that?
Sure. So I think talking about data privacy, I'll just start off with something that happened yesterday. I met this ad tech vendor, and I was going to give my business card to him. And just before I was going to give my business card, he's like, "Sir, I have all your data. I have your phone number, I have your email address." I said, "मेरे घर का address भी है तेरे पास." So I'm just saying this is the data, and apparently they have WhatsApp groups or forums where they share data about agency people and all of that. But anyway, from the consumer point of view, I feel, there are two ways that a marketer can kind of target you, right? From a consumer point of view, it will be either contextual or behavioral. And if I have to put this in a simple example, I'd say for example, when it's contextual, means they're trying to target you according to where you are. Say for example, you're on a certain website, and they will target you based on what kind of content is on that website at that point of time. And behavioral is the way you've behaved in the past, your past behavior, your cookie data, your device ID data, right? So for example, if you walk into a whiskey bar and someone comes to you and, "Hey, we are having an event for whiskey lovers, and here's a pamphlet for that," right? That's contextual targeting. But for example, you walk into a normal bar, but they know that you usually order whiskeys, and then someone comes to you with a pamphlet and says, "Hey, I know you're a whiskey lover, and here's another event that's happening for you guys," right? So that's the kind of difference between the contextual and the behavioral part of it. But again, I'll leave it to the other guys to kind of
So
take it
yeah,
forward.
on that point, I think it's a very nice time for you, Shridhar, to talk about, is it a 30 ml problem, a 60 or a 90 ml problem? Is it a small, big or large, or it is a Patiala problem?
You know, with coming from Diageo, and he talked about whiskey, I said the only data which matters to us is 30 ml, 60 ml, and 90 ml. Rest all data are just pure vanity. This is the only metrics we want. Because as marketeers, we are, pressured for growth. We believe marketing has to be the engine of growth. So that will remain. But I want to, Madhukar, you raised an important point, and this panel is about being creepy or contextual. I think the fundamental thing is that consumer is not going to be ignorant for long. This is consumers move twice as speed than marketeers do. So they will always be ahead of the curve, and marketers will play the catching game. This is a forewarning, the way I look at it, to the marketers. For the time being, consumers are ignorant and they're being bombarded, but it's not going to last long. The ownership of data is going to move from the marketers to the consumers. So consumers will finally start either owning the entire data or co-owning with the marketeers. Now let's pause at that point and try to do some amount of crystal ball gazing. What would happen in years to come if consumers start owning the data? What would happen 5 years, 10 years down the line if consumers own the data? Will he be ignorant? Will he feel bombarded? No, that's not going to happen. In my view, it's going to lead to two business models. One is, as an owner, I'm going to ask for skinny bundling, as I call it, that give me experiences which are tailored to me, give me personalization stuff, therefore, which is absolutely to your point of contextual, and therefore, I'm ready to trade with you. Skinny bundling will happen, and consumers will own that. The second thing which will happen as consumers become much more savvy and start owning their networks and communities, it will lead to a rise of a phenomenon called the pixel influencers. Because the consumers know these are the kind of people or community which I can influence through my own data. And marketeers will start paying for that data. So ultimately, in sum, I see the power shifting from whether it is the DMPs or the marketeers to ultimately in the table of the consumer. She will rule it.
Yeah, that's a very important point, Sridhar. Now, I just have one more, perspective from a consumer, since we are in the consumer section right now. I usually, respond to brands that I connect with really well, those who understand me, like the loyalty program, for example, that I'm signed up with the hotel and the airline and all. I always look at their notification. I always go to their app. So, Avinash, let me ask you, from a data perspective, and since you are coming from a machine learning background, you're doing pretty heavy stuff on data side and Shiros. What do you think? Where can technology help us, number one? And number two, do you concur that the brands that you connect with, maybe loyalty, for example, is a right way for other brands to, just connect with their customers?
Yeah, so thinking in terms of the user, Sridhar brought up a very good point in terms of personalization. So at Shiros, we believe in personalization a lot. And as a user, if you think, so you said, right, 120 million, 120 push notifications or different kinds of contact from brands every day or every week. What happens is the user starts seeing them as not relevant, and they blanket ban everything from them. So they just use ad blockers, or they stop ignoring the mails or whatever. Stop lifting the phone calls. Like I was reading insight from Truecaller, and they said like every month 22 million spam calls come to the users. What happens is when I see a phone call, if it's an unknown number, I don't even lift it. How many of us even lift unknown phone numbers, right? None. So this is where personalization is very important. If I believe in the platform where I'm in, if I believe the brand, I'm going to watch their notifications, their ads, their mails, or whatever. But how do you stand out? How do you make yourself different from all the spammers out there? So this is where contextual platforms help a lot. More data, more tracking helps a lot. But where do you draw the line? So that's what we are here to discuss it.
What's your take on it, Ankit? Because one thing is pretty clear. We all agree that behavioral targeting, contextual targeting, consumer owning the data. Where is it headed towards for marketers? I mean,
how do you woo and really wow the customer and win him? I think that's the million-dollar question without being creepy. And I think what Sridhar pointed, I think the key here is that it has to be opt-in. If you willingly give your data and the marketer uses that to make the experience or the service you're consuming very, very personalized, then it really is a wow for the customer. And I'll give you a very interesting example. So I'm sure all of us have been in these long flights from, say, one place to be 10, 12 hours. And sometimes you don't want to watch the content. You want to use that time to have a great conversation with someone who's your co-passenger. And many times you miss that. So I think KLM Airlines recently did an interesting campaign where when you're booking your flight, they'll give you some kind of a way to give your social media profile, whether it is your LinkedIn or Twitter, or whatever your interests are. And then they try to marry with someone who's also traveling on the same flight and who have the similar interests. And then they will ask you, obviously, as opt-in, that do you both want to travel together? And I think when you do that, that whole journey becomes very memorable because the person you are traveling with, you have really great conversations. So not just that you have built a great experience for me during the journey, it builds loyalty for me to go back to KLM if I'm open to do these kind of things. So I think the key here is opt-in, and it's not that consumers are not willing to give the data. As long as you use to make it very contextual and personalized for me, I'm willing to give that data. And I think the other key point is that I'm not open to give all the data to all the entities all the time. So you need to have that kind of a control for the user who can choose as and when he wants to give his data. So maybe not all the time they would want to sit with someone to have a great conversation. So two important points, opt-in and control when to give the data.
Yeah. No, that's a good point because I recently signed up for a newsletter and at the end of the sign-up screen, there were a bunch of questions, 3-4 questions. Do you want to connect, want us to connect with you on a weekly basis or a monthly basis? So they were taking a consent from me and they were respecting the conversation. So it's no more a communication, it's a conversational approach, which I think marketing is headed towards.
And that's the GDPR approach, right? Like again, and I think in 2018, it's been the year of data privacy and GDPR, especially in Europe. But at the same time, actually this opt-in thing that you were talking about, that reminded me of a very famous speech by Steve Jobs in 2010 at a TechCrunch event where he said, ask them every time, make them tell you to stop asking them. And that in 2010 and 2018, we're talking about GDPR. But if you see Apple, the way they've structured data privacy and they've created an envelope of obviously looking at the consumer from the first, I think is probably the epitome of how data privacy should be done across all channels.
Yeah, that's right. So that leads us to the next, topic and next perspective that we will talk about, which is the marketer's perspective. And I hope most of you, because we all are from marketing domain and marketing background, this is the second topic that we're going to talk about, and we're going to just discuss about the marketer's perspective. So we all know, on an average, this was research done by Forrester. On an average, a company has about 17 different tools that their team works on, ranging from email platform to SMS to push notification, app analytics, and whatnot. Different applications, different data sets. And this is again a research which came from Forrester, which said 82% of the marketers struggle to bring their data together. The data is sitting in their ESP, the data is sitting in their mobile app analytics, the data is sitting in the social platforms, and so on and so forth. So 82%. And then another research from Accenture said 78% of brands cannot recognize when the customers are staring them in the face. So these are some mind-boggling numbers. With plethora of data, plethora of platforms, what is happening is marketers are just passing this dysfunction to the consumer. And that leads to the first topic where I'm getting 140 communicational, promotional notification from different brands, different channels, and so on. So this leads to the next topic. First of all, do you agree that this is a problem? The data, the deluge of data, and the plethora of applications that marketers are using, is it a problem? Let me start with you, Sridhar. What do you think?
No, I think, yes, enough has been said about, big data and digital disruptions and how marketeers need to use it. I think somewhere down the line, we are losing sense of, how to use these data intelligently and smartly. And consumers are leaving a lot of their footprints, digital footprints across. And that, to me, is more valuable. Let me illustrate that with an example. Traditionally in US, we always believed that Smirnoff was for the youngsters. And we kept on investing in all those night parties and those EDM festivals and etc. And ultimately, we realized that it is not the guy who's going and buying Smirnoff off the shelf or drinking at the pub and bar. It was the 40-year-old who was going and doing it. Right, so the marketeer, this was a classic problem where the marketeer got stuck in its own way of perception of who the consumer is. And we are bringing that change. In India particularly, what we are trying to do in Diageo is not look at those usual demographics and SECs and trying to shift to whether the consumer has given her or his intent. That to me is far more important than other data sets, or whether I have his mobile number or his location, etc. The intent of purchase is absolutely critical to me. And moment that data signal is available, then it is job of the marketer to kind of intercept that signal and showcase the product he or she is selling. Because ultimately, we are all salesmen. As marketing, we are either support sell or go in the market and sell. Each one of us have to do it. And therefore, to the point of where we want to focus is on consumer intent. And that data signal is absolutely critical above anything. So I don't care whether you are a 25-year-old or a 45-year-old. But if you are in the market to buy a vodka, our brand has to have a presence there.
Yeah,
Maybe
okay,
I'll add a couple of points here. So
yeah.
I think one has to realize that, and I think that's what Albert Einstein once famously said, that you can't solve the problem with the mind now with the mind you had created in the first place. So I think whether it is regulations, whether it is consumer consciousness, it really would make marketers like us to really go back and, as Sridhar was saying, do we really need this kind of data? Are these I think big data, and pardon me being on this side, sometimes really blind us as marketers, and we really get wow with new technologies. But what you really need is a very small data, whether it is intent or whether it is a certain insight which is core will never change. Think, for example, what Amazon or Walmart did, right? They always said that people would want variety, access, low prices. And let me only get that kind of data and build a whole business model around that, rather than trying to find multiple data sets, find a correlation between them, which is big data. Let me focus on what is the small data, the causation, the why, and only focus on that. So I think that is very, very important, that we really need to be very clear of, as marketers, we have to relook our data infrastructure, and do we need all kind of data? What are those 2 or 3 signals which really drive 80% of my, say, purchase?
Right, so you're saying don't overcomplicate it, just keep it simple. But let me just throw a use case here, right, Kabir, for you. And I would like to hear how would you solve this problem, since you work with Saatchi Performance, so you might be doing this attribution and other things on a daily basis. This is a real life example. I signed up for, I just booked a holiday and I had to cancel the holiday for whatever reason. I called the contact center and I said, when will my refund be processed? They said, it's a bank holiday, it might take 3-4 days. Simple. In the meantime, those 3-4 days, I got 4 or 5 emails about Thailand holidays, about Singapore holidays. I got a call as well that there are some promotions going on. So my point is the data, again, coming back to the same problem. Marketers are dealing with a service data, a marketing data, and we are also talking about drawing a line between being creepy and all. Here I'm waiting for the refund to hit my bank account, and you are sending me more promotions to book the holiday. How do you solve this problem?
I think for this problem, I would just say the contact service team has to basically kind of get integrated with the marketing team. But what I think on top of that, I think in the last 10 years, there has been so much the data has basically come guns blazing, and a lot of marketers don't understand how to kind of customize experiences for their target audiences to be able to get the best out of them. And this is actually a challenge, right? Because there is a lot of talk, as everyone said, right? There's a lot of talk about big data, but there are hardly marketers who are kind of creating experiences to be able to show a customized kind of a user experience to their users. I'll give you a very small example from childhood, actually. So there was, and I would say so there was this grocery store near my house, and his name was Harish Bhai. And he used to obviously, like my parents, we used to go there and buy whatever, like bread, eggs, and stuff like that. And I would say I think everyone in our industry now should become a Harish Bhai based on the example, what he started doing. So he started this like delivery service where you could call him and you can say, hey, I want these things, and you can just order and it'll just reach your house. So my mom ordered, like first Sunday she ordered 15 items. Second Sunday she ordered 16 items. Third Sunday she ordered another 14 items. Fifth Sunday, Harish Bhai calls up my mom and he's like, these are the 13 things that you order every week. What else do you want to order? I'm sending the guy home. So he basically collected data and created a customized experience for my family. And I think every marketer in that context, like a small example, but should be a Harish Bhai basically.
Yeah, no, very, very well said example, good example. But Harish Bhai had a region to serve. When we are talking about millions and trillions and gigabytes of data, and Abhinav, that's a question to you. How do you solve the scalability problem? Because I think that's where it gets lost in translation. We can say and preach and discuss a lot of things, but when the rubber hits the road, when you're dealing with just multitude of data, how do you solve that?
So basically the problem here is we have tons of data, but the key data, the most important data is the intent of the user. And the intent of the user is known to the platforms where the users are right now, where there might be any websites or there might be social networks like Shiro's. So the marketers, instead of thinking like, okay, I should target a woman between 22 to 24 in metros, what they should do is, hey, this is the thing that I want to sell. You as a platform know the best. You know the intent of our users. Why don't you do it for us? So maybe a little bit of transfer of this targeting should be done to the platforms rather than directly by the marketers, because the platforms know at scale right now how many women are willing to buy a new furniture for their house. And secondly, the point that Ankit was raising and even you were pointing out was, you canceled your tickets, but the marketer doesn't know that you canceled your tickets. Yeah. So where do you close the loop? So the user should also have a chance to opt out of the system, right? So as in, okay, I canceled my tickets. Let everybody know that I canceled my tickets. So that again is in the hands of the platform, in hands of the social network. So the marketers should give more freedom to the platforms. They should create the custom campaigns for them, more branded content, branded stories. And in this way, it will be more personalized, and it will also serve the users better, and it will not be too annoying. Like my mom was saying, she sees ads on all the websites all the time, and she's not a sophisticated user. She doesn't use ad blocking and all those things. She said, we furnished all our house, and why are we still seeing TV ads and sofa set ads and all those things? Why don't the brands just ask me if I already bought them or not? I would be willing to give that answer. So this answer lies in the platforms. So the brands should ask the platforms whether this user has already purchased this or not, and based on that, they can stop doing that.
Shruti, I'm interested to know how is Diageo doing it, like connecting data? So, because yours is a very different way of the way you approach your consumers and.
Yeah, actually, ours is a very restricted category in India, as you would understand, that all 4 P's of marketing, we are landlocked, and therefore it forces us to think. We can't show our products on TV. We can't take prizes unless the government approves it. There are only 65,000 alcohol retail points in the country serving 1.2 billion people. Even Spain has 300,000 outlets. Right, so those are the challenges. And that forces us to really think that how can we bring efficiencies and effectiveness into all our marketing adults. And therefore, the consumer data's intent is more important to us rather than owning the PII information, or PII thing. And the reason is we have to think, for example, if we are seeing a growing trend on pubs near me. Now, if a person has searched pubs near me or nightlife in Cyber Hub Delhi, right, or nightlife, best restaurants or best pubs in Bandra Kurla complex, that is an important intent signal for me, right? And therefore, It is then the onus of the media team and the marketing to intercept that intent and show it. And that, to my mind, doesn't seem to the consumer is not creepy then, because the consumer has already shown an interest. And therefore, can I intercept and start creating a value for the consumer?
Yeah, I think both perspective that we talked about, the consumer and the marketer, we all more or less, and I think it's a no-brainer that it has to be consent-based. We have to respect the data points, like your example, from your old days of the retailer, the colony retailer. It's just the way that's, collect the data but be respectful. And I think that's what leads us to the third topic, which is the GDPR. I think this is going to be something, the regulatory perspective to it, right? So
Yeah.
they are going to build the boundaries. They are going to define the playground where we play. So GDPR, I'm sure most of us here in the room know, the consent is at the center of everything, and that's what we are leading to in this discussion as well. And the Sri Krishna committee, which is, I think they have proposed already, right? Yesterday, I think they prepared the draft and sent it over, which talks about right to access, right to forget, right to not give any personally identifiable information. So consumers are going to be at the center of a lot of things. And the data which the brands control. My question to you, and this is something that we were discussing, Kabir, during the session that we had before this, was, so the question is, how is this going to change the marketer's universe on the social media side of things? Is it going to give less control to marketers to reach the audience at the right time, at the right moment?
So I think, GDPR again is something which is very new. So it's just started this year in Europe, right? So we have to see a few years of how GDPR regulation impacts marketing. It hasn't seen a significant impact yet. Even because if you see GDPR, the kind of infrastructure that a regulatory body has to build around it to be able to audit it, right, is humongous. So we haven't seen, we're seeing some kind of cases coming out and stuff like that, litigations coming out, but we haven't seen significant impact. But essentially, when GDPR kind of kicks in with guns blazing, it's definitely going to impact marketers in terms of relevancy of advertising, right? Because what it cuts down when we're talking about contextual versus behavioral, contextual is fine because contextual is targeting people based on what they're already doing on the website or at that place, right? But behavioral is something which gets cuts down because it basically does not allow you to collect that device ID or cookie level data, and hence it becomes difficult for people to show relevant ads. Now, my counter argument to someone or say a consumer would be, if you have to see ads, on a website, it might as well be relevant to you, right? If you're say, for example, browsing on a website which is basically which is saying things to do in Bali, and somehow someone comes and says, oh, buy this washing machine, it's not relevant. Or probably, say for example, say for example, I'm already married, right? So and if there's someone who comes and shows me an ad for Tinder, right? It's not relevant to me. So if you're going to see ads, it might as well be relevant, which is a counter argument to GDPR. And a lot of consumers, I believe, are already understand that, right? Because they're like, okay, because I'm using a lot of publishers, I'm kind of consuming a lot of content for free, so I have to obviously watch ads for that. But if I watch ads, they might as well be relevant. And to your point, right, then your mom can see basically more relevant ads and not see like stuff she's already bought, right? So, yeah.
Can I take it? Okay. I think it's an interesting, as I said, it is an early warning for all of us in the marketing world. If we don't behave ourselves, regulators will come in and impose upon us. And the way I look at it is, GDPR, it stands for General Data Protection and Regulations. R for me is not regulations. R for me is responsibility. It is the responsibility of the marketer to ensure whatever data he collects it is managed in a very secure environment and marketed very, very responsibly. I think that's a behavioral change which we need to bring in the marketing front. We have to become responsible marketeers, right? Gone are the days where, where we could do whatever we felt like. Just to know what the impression of marketing is, ask any of the sales guys what they think of marketing. They will tell you. Right? Just sit in Babel towers and just communicate whatever they want to. Right? I think this will bring in the regulation. It is matter of time when India comes in. We are already seeing Sri Krishna Committee drafting the bill, where India will move at the pace of Europe. Right? It kicked in last year, May 28. And the fine for not being responsible is 4% of global turnover, or 20 million euros. We can't afford to have that kind of serious impeachment on us. So I think the way to look at it is far more positively, rather than looking at it as a regulation or a hands tied back. The way to look at it is being responsible. How can we become far more responsible marketeer, respect the consumer's privacy and his the opt-in, consent which he has provided.
Yeah, and Ankit, I'm sure you will have some points, working for Vizuri and, looking at the data and how it's going to affect the larger marketers.
Absolutely. I think for us as technology vendors, it helps us go back to the drawing board. And now when we are building products and services, we have to think privacy by design. We have to think that what are the kind of controls I have to give, to the user, but also to the organization. Not all the folks in an organization should have access to all the user information. So it builds that user controls, access control for both the organization as well as the user to know what a certain individual should see. So I think what GDPR and similar regulations does, it makes us go back to the drawing board to build privacy by design, and also build these access controls, which will become win-win for both the consumer by getting relevant ads and for me to comply with these kinds of things. And as Sridhar rightly pointed, it is a responsibility, not a regulation.
Yeah. Great one. So, Avinash, my question to you is the right to forget. So when I go to Shiro's, I actually explicitly say that these are the groups I want to join and I contribute and I consume content. What do you think right to forget really means? If I just want to opt out, is all my data gone and I'm off the system? How does that really work?
So, right to forget is, it's like instead of seeing it as a yes or no, you could see it as a gradual layer-wise thing. Certain things you are not up for grabs for everybody to see, but they are legally bound to be remain in the database, right? So when I say right to forget, as a consumer, I just mean to say I don't want to see ads in a certain domain or in a certain thing. Say medical, right? In medical histories, so when I say right to forget, I cannot delete all my medical history back. But I might be implying that I don't want to see ads based on my medical history. It's very simple in that sense. End of the day, user consent is really important, and it's the reality. So currently it's a one-sided relationship, but users and marketers both are in a relationship, right? So it might as well be based on consent, and we might as well take users' choices every step of the way. When they say right to forget, we might leave them alone, and when they say, hey, show me relevant ads, we might start showing them relevant ads.
Sorry, just to add one quick point, right? So I kind of disagree with the responsibility piece, because I feel responsibility sounds really good, right? When we speak at conferences and we're speaking that, oh, it's our moral responsibility to be kind of to take care of data. But I think self-regulation in general, not just in our industry, has never worked. Financial markets were self-regulated until 2008, and we saw what happened of that. Oil industry in the 60s and 70s was self-regulated, and we saw what happened of that. We saw what happened with self-regulation on data with Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. So regulation is important. It has to be obviously relevant to the consumers. But I feel it's obviously moral responsibility, but eventually if everyone does not have the same kind of level playing field, which is kind of put in place by a regulator, which is independent of commercial entities, that's when real regulation will come in.
And to that point, I think you're spot on saying that self-regulations and there has to be a regulatory body which will govern things. But from a consumer perspective, and this is a question to all the panelists here, I as a consumer know that I can opt out and unsubscribe from, let's say, communication. I can go and use some ad blockers. I can go and put my phone on DND. And there are a lot of ways how I can restrict communication which is flowing to me. What do you think? Are we as, and I've seen in our counterparts in the other countries, they are pretty aware about how to block ads and how to unsubscribe from the list and manage their communications which are coming to them. Do you think consumers, in our country also need to be more aware of how to regulate these communications themselves? Because we are essentially talking about not a communicational approach to marketing, but more conversational, and it has to be two-way. So, regulatory compliance, data privacy, all of those marketers are taking a lot of heat, but consumer on the other side also need to come and shake hand. What's your perspective on that?
So I have a point to add here. So when you say the users, how much do they know about data privacy and how do they control their own data? So when data regulations are not in place and when the marketers don't behave themselves in a responsible manner, what happens is the user takes control of her own data. And what happens is she will start using maybe ad blockers. So ad blockers are one of the most popular plugins on Google Chrome right now, so on the browsers. And similarly, they will start using DNDs, their mobile numbers. So even DND is extremely popular in India. Almost every second person is registering their number on DND. So what happens later on is you will stop even getting access to these users. So we might as well take up the responsibility and...
I think the consumer is willing to share the data as long as you make the whole experience personalized. So I'll give you another example. Right? If anyone of you have been to a Disneyland, when you are entering these days, they'll ask you to wear a magic band. When you're wearing that magic band, they very clearly says that I'll use all the data I collect through it to make your experience much more enriching. Whether it is in terms of accessing the rides without standing in a queue, whether it is your experience at the hotel for checkouts. So I think when you are entering, they explicitly mention and you have the choice whether you want to take that. And once you take that choice, you have a better experience. I think that's where the consumer handshake has to happen with the marketer, that you make it opt-in and then you actually deliver value when you are sharing that data. So consumers are not saying that don't take my data, but you use it to make my experience better. I think that is the key here.
Yeah, I think we are just at the neck of the time, but thank you to all of you. Thank you, Kabir. Thank you, Sridhar. Thank you, Ankit and Avinash. I think it was a good discussion. There are a lot of things that we will discuss outside of this room. Do we have time for a Q&A or? Yeah, so we are anyway here. We will see you guys outside and connect with you outside. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you once again for that very engaging session. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to urge you all to please connect with all of our speakers offline.